Please welcome Gary Dell'Abate. How y'all doing tonight? Great! Great to be in Miami. I was in Tampa. The weather sucks. It's much nicer here. Coral Gables, sorry, Coral, but it's like Miami, except it's Miami. Well, I got to tell you, I have to thank everybody for coming out. It's I feel like I've been on the tour of love because I keep coming into rooms like this, and everybody has been so just happy to see me, which is a great thing, and so nice, and you know, making the New York, this whole experience, I didn't know what to expect. And making the New York Times bestseller list, it's been like a crazy ride, being on the Letterman show, and of course, if you listen to the show closely, it's all coming to an end very soon. Because it's been enough, and it really is. I realize that after this weekend, I'm doing the Jimmy Fallon show on Monday, and I did Rachel Ray last week, and that airs on December 21st, and then that's sort of it. Except for a couple of, doing a book signing in Cleveland next week and a couple of local book signings, and then, you know, then Christmas comes, and then after Christmas, I don't think the book company cares about you anymore. And then just, you know, it goes where it goes. But it's been a crazy ride. It's been more than I ever expected. Metcher, thank you very much. We're going to get to the Mets. So what I'm going to do here tonight is I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, how I came to write the book, some of the stuff that's in it. I'm going to read two very short passages because I hate it when people read and bore the crap out of you. And then I'll take some questions and answers, and then we'll start signing books. So I'll start by saying, you know, the way this book came about was I was out there sort of hawking another book. I used to say I was out there pitching another book, but then some idiot in the crowd would say, don't pitch. I was out there hawking another book about my lists and my love of music and all that stuff, and I went to talk to a book agent friend of mine, and I said, you know, do you think, is anybody going to be interested in this? And he said, well, you know, you could get that book out there, and, you know, maybe you could sell it, but he goes, I think the thing that people are really interested in is, what's your story? And I said, well, I don't have a story. And he said, everybody has a story, you know. And when he said, what's your story, I knew exactly what he meant. So I called him up the next morning, and I said, okay, you want to know what my story is? Here's my story. And I told it to him, and he goes, that's great. That's a story that people would be interested in. I said, yeah, there's a problem. I don't know that I want to tell that story because it's highly personal. It involves a lot of people in my family. And I said, you know, give me some time on this. So I went home and I talked to my wife that night. And I said, I don't think I'm going to do this. And she said, well, hold on a second. You know, it's you. I know there's people in your family involved, but it's your story too. Why don't you think, you know, there's a way you can tell the story without, you know, upsetting people. And you should talk to everybody. So I thought about it for like a week, and then I called my brother, and I told him about it. He was very supportive of it. And then I had to go talk to my mom, because my mom, for some of you who haven't read the book yet, some of you I think here might have read the book already. My mom is like the focal point of the first 5 or 6 chapters of the book, and it's some pretty heavy stuff, some pretty personal stuff. And I went and I talked to my mom about it, and she was on board with it. So that whole process took like, I'm going to say like a month and a half. You know, I really had to sort of get into a head. When I first, so the idea of telling the story, I didn't want to tell it. And the thing that I found that's interesting is, you know, so I talk about that I have a mom that suffered from mental illness. You know, she suffered from depression. She was hospitalized a couple of times. And, you know, I wanted to tell the story in a way that, you know, I still love my mother. I see my mother every Wednesday. I stop by Cupcake Wednesdays. I bring my mother a cupcake from France. And I really do. Not the Bababooey, by the way. She likes the hostess. And then, you know, she generally comes over on the weekends and stuff. So I wanted to tell the story in a way, you know, because at the end of the day, I still love my mom. I know I spoke to somebody who wrote a book once, and I said, are you sorry you wrote a book about your family? And they said they were, and I said, why? And they said, well, because I wrote the book from a very angry place. And that sort of gave me the template for what I knew. I knew I wasn't coming from an angry place. And in a way, it was sort of interesting because it opened up a discussion with my mom and I that we might never have had. And, you know, after I'd written the book, but it hadn't been actually printed yet, I was talking to my mom about it. And we were talking about, I told her about some of the stuff that was in the book, and my mom said to me, she goes, was I a bad mom? And I said, no, Mom. I said, you know, you weren't. And what I tried to explain to people that I talked to, what I told her that day was, listen, if you were an alcoholic, if you were a drug addict, if you were taking pills, if you were gambling and you were wrecking our lives, I probably could be angry because I could say that's you being selfish, but you can't help mental illness. It was never her fault, and she did the best she could, especially with the tools they had at the time. So I thought that was a discussion that my mom and I probably would, we never would have talked about how I grew up if I didn't write this book, and at the end of the day, it ended up being a good thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read a couple of very short passages, and my mom, I said, is a focal point of the book, but then there's also stories in there. There's a whole chapter about the first pitch, there's a whole chapter about the Take Me Back videotape, and then there's a lot of stuff in there about how I met Howard, how I met Fred, how I met all those guys. So I'm going to start off, and I have to put my glasses on because I'll be 50 in March, and I can't see anything anymore. And I'm going to read. I feel good. I feel better than I did at 40, I'll tell you that. So I'm going to start with, this is a story about my mom, and this is some of the craziness that used to go on in my house, and somebody said to me, you know, there's two kinds of crazy. There's mental illness crazy, and there's Italian mother crazy. And I'm not positive which one this is. I think this one goes more to the protective Italian mother, but this was like the lunacy that would go on in my neighborhood. My mom had temper problems. The temper problems meant that even when my mom was in the right, she could occasionally wind up in the wrong. In our part of town, she had a lot of friends, but she also had a lot of people she perceived to be enemies. That's how it was with her. Everything was black and white. You were her friend or you were her enemy. Our next door neighbors happened to be enemies. The houses on my street were practically on top of one another, separated by just a thin driveway. The older son next door was just a grade ahead of me, and for some reason, he had it in for me. He constantly beat the crap out of me. It became a regular topic of conversation in my house. What are we going to do about Gary getting beaten up? I was in 3rd grade. Finally, one warm spring afternoon, my mom decided she's going to go next door and have a chat with the guy's mom. It was just like out of the Brady Bunch, when Peter was getting picked on and Mike and Carol went over to the bully's house, expecting everyone to be reasonable. Except in my case, they weren't. With me on her heels, my mom walked over and knocked on her neighbor's door. I noticed a lot of kids playing ball on the street. Excuse me. I stopped myself at the very edge of our property line on the driveway, which meant I was still plenty close to listen to the conversation. I'd never been in their house, and I was very anxious about being as close as I was. Our neighbor opened the screen door, but instead of inviting my mom in, she stepped up onto the top step of the three-step stoop. My mom said, "I want your son to leave my son alone." So far, so good. It's a perfectly reasonable request. Carol Brady would have been proud. Then our neighbor answered in a flip, casual tone, "Well, maybe your son can defend himself." Uh-oh. I can't remember who dropped the first F-bomb, but in a matter of seconds they were flying. The neighbor was yelling, "F you," my mom yelled it back, and then my mom pushed her. My first thought was, let's get out of here now, Mom. This isn't working. We should walk away right now. I knew that my mom would get herself worked up, and it would be impossible to stop this thing from escalating. There would be no turning back. Our neighbor couldn't believe she'd been pushed. She stood there, her mouth open, like she was watching a scary movie, only she was in it. Now people were starting to gather around. The kids who'd been playing ball on the street dropped their bats and stared. Then my mom took it to another level. There were shrubs in a flower bed just to the side of our neighbor's stoop, underneath the big bay window. As the woman stood there, my mom reached down and pulled up some of the shrubs. She must have caught a glimpse of the roots because she decided that they might make a good weapon. Then she started bashing our neighbor with the shrubs. Dirt was flying everywhere. By now the neighborhood parents were in the street watching too. They were fascinated, amazed, horrified, and stunned. I was petrified and embarrassed. This is not what we came here to do, I thought. My mom had started out on the right, and now she was beating our neighbor with her own shrubbery. And the postscript to that story that I was telling everyone was, you know, they called the cops. So the police come, they put my mom in the back of a police car, they put the neighbor in the back of a police car, and I guess, you know, the cops talked to everybody, they figured out that it was just, you know, two future soccer moms having a fight, they didn't want to do the paperwork, so they let them out. But it was very traumatic seeing my mom in the back of a police car, and we went home, and I don't think, at dinner time, my father said, "What happened?" My mother, "There's nothing." Like, my father said, "Anything happened?" My mother, "No, nothing." And I think it came up like a couple of weeks later, and when I brought it up, I said, "Oh my God, Barbara, what happened?" She goes, "Yeah, that lady's crazy. She should have been arrested." and so that's how it went. So that's one of the funnier stories from the book. Not all of them are quite that light. Then along the way in the book, I talk about how I first came to be part of the show, and I talk about a lot of the jobs I had before I got to the Howard Stern Show. I got to NBC, but I did a lot of odd jobs in radio, all that sort of stuff. And I talk about, I was working on the show for about 3 weeks. I'd been with the show for about 3 weeks. And Howard had said to me when I first saw him for an interview, he said, well, you know what, let's give it a try. Because I think he didn't want to commit to anything till he saw me work a little bit. He said, let's try it out for a month and see how it goes. So in my mind, I'm waiting for a month to be up, you know, to figure out how it's all going to go. So about 3 weeks in, Howard decides that he's going to do something that's never been done on the radio before. I've now been working for him for 3 weeks, and that's where I'm going to pick this up. One afternoon, Howard decided we were going to do something that had never been done on the radio before. Convince a woman to get naked on the air. Just because none of our listeners could see what we were doing didn't mean we couldn't be titillating and push the envelope. He announced the contest, and we had 3 women call in who wanted to do it. It really didn't take much convincing, nor has it ever. I took their numbers, called them back, and set up times for them to come in the next day. Before the show that afternoon, Howard pulled me aside. He said, listen, this isn't a circus. I want you to put newspaper over the window. Do not let anyone who doesn't need to be in the studio get inside the studio. Absolutely, I said. We went on the air. The girls were inside, and it was crazy. The way Howard described them was brilliant. You didn't need to see them to get a clear picture of how good they looked. A steady stream of people, mostly the other young producers and assistants I've been working with, were coming up to the door trying to get in to get a look. And I told all of them to turn around. That wasn't too hard. But then the lawyer I worked with every day came by. I need to get in, he said. I can't, I said. Howard told me not to let anyone in. I am the lawyer, he said again, calmly but more forcefully. You need to let me in. Why, I asked. Because, he said, I am the lawyer and I need to see if there is something indecent happening here. Well, I said, you don't really need to see if something indecent is going on. You need to hear if something indecent is going on. If you want, you can sit across the hall and listen on some headphones. He was pissed. He stared at me. And then he audibly grunted and turned on his heels to go listen to the show. Afterward, I told Howard what had happened. He told me I did the right thing, but 2 other things happened because of it. 1, he saw that I had his back. 2, I saw that he had my back for having his back. There were no repercussions for what I did. And I realized from then on, in any dispute between Howard and management, I was always going to side with Howard. If I had to put my eggs in one basket, without a doubt, they were going to be in his. Even after that incident, though, I still wasn't sure if I had a full-time job. I'd been working on the show for nearly a month, and I was literally counting the days until those 4 weeks were up. I figured Howard and Fred were too, and then we'd have a conversation about how I was doing. The show ended at 6:54:30 on the dot at the end of every day. I would grab the drum and the cymbal and walk back to Howard's office with him. We'd do some small talk about the show, but at the 1-month mark I was too anxious. I just blurted out, so what's the story? About what, he said, kind of confused. About me. You said you guys told me I was going to be hired on a temporary basis for a month. Well, it's been a month. Am I hired? He looked at me like I was an idiot. What are you talking about? You got the job. So that's how I found out I had the job. And that was 27 years ago or so. And it's been an amazing ride. You know, in that period of time, I've met, you know, Mickey Mantle, Arnold Schwarzenegger, JFK Jr., governors, senators, every musician I've ever wanted to meet, Paul McCartney, Billy Joel. I've been to the Emmys, the Oscars, and you know, we've just been involved in all sorts of stuff. We did a show on 9/11 that I'm very proud of. We did a show for the Tiger Woods Mistress Beauty Pageant that I'm very proud of. You know, so it sort of runs the gamut. And so that's my little rap about how I came to write the book. What I'll do is we'll take questions for just a few minutes and then we'll get started. So I'll take you right up front. What's your question?
Thanks.
Just yell it out loud.
Thanks for coming, Gary.
Thanks for having me.
Love you, man. Is there, listening to a lot of the history of Howard and everything, is there a favorite era of yours? I mean, you guys are great now, but is there a time you look back and say, man, that was a golden age?